Welcome to West Virginia Beer Roads and today's Roundtable edition. Our topic is beverage alcohol policy and law, things that greatly impact the business potential of our bar and restaurant industry, and also weigh heavily on our brewery, winery, and distillery industries in the state. Joining me today are three esteemed West Virginians with special knowledge and expertise in these alcohol policy matters. First, I have Jeff Mckay. Jeff Mckay is owner of the Summit Beer Station in Huntington, West Virginia. Welcome, Jeff.
All right, thank you, Charles.
And next, we have Matt Kwasniewski. Matt is president of Big Timber Brewing Company in Elkins, West Virginia. Matt, welcome to West Virginia Beer Roads.
Thanks for having me, Charles.
Okay, and next, Chuck Johnson. Chuck is an associate with Frost Brown Todd law firm in Charleston, West Virginia. Welcome, Chuck.
Glad to be here. Cheers.
Hey, cheers. And last but not least, sitting in as my co-host today is Rob Abson, South Charleston, West Virginia, who also has a lot of background in alcohol legislation and policy. So, guys, we're going to start with Jeff Mckay today because Jeff has been most active recently and really started a whole initiative, it appears. And Jeff, I'd just like for you to tell what you've been up to and what's going on with the program you're working on.
Yeah, honestly, all of this stems from what we accomplished, 9 or 10 months ago with getting some temporary provisions that allowed curbside delivery and home delivery for on-premise accounts. And I just felt that the state wasn't being proactive enough to deal with or to help the service industry coming into the winter months. So those temporary provisions that were enacted 9 months ago were great over the course of decent weather, but the outdoor dining permits are not feasible right now, and the home delivery sadly kind of fell a little flat, and I think a lot of people realized that there was a lot of labor to pay for there, and there were too many other moving parts. So I began to get frustrated with some of the responses that I was getting from the state, and we were trying to find ways to be creative with it and utilize home rule, and everything was just falling flat, essentially. So I got together with some local legislators and other like-minded individuals, and we felt that we needed kind of a public campaign, much in the same way that the medical marijuana bill was presented to the public in the legislature. Kind of a people-powered initiative. So I think that's probably where we stand today until some other plans further down the road. I guess if you wanted me to go into specifics, I can, but I don't want to bog everybody down with details.
Yeah, well, I think what we're hearing is that there were, because in large part because of the pandemic and a lot of the restrictions that's put on retail or on bars and restaurants, that you're finding there are policies that could be improved that would help bars and retailers get through this tough business environment. I mean, that's kind of what I understood. Does that describe it well?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's pretty on the nose there. So the policies that we want to enact and the code that we want to change, none of this is new. This has always held us back. This has always hamstrung the industry in a variety of ways. So I felt that we could do more, and I had the impression that the state maybe didn't realize what kind of situation the service industry's been in. So I wanted to kind of maybe transition away from what we accomplished 9 months ago and hopefully go back to the drawing board to find ways to give bars and restaurants some relief. Our expenses are higher now than what they were before the pandemic. I mean, we're spending more on paper, more on ink, more on labor to make sure that everybody's following guidelines. I'm purchasing masks for people when they come through the door. I'm spending more on sanitizer. I'm spending more on cleaner, everything. So how do we begin to balance that out? And the easiest way I felt was to kind of tackle these long standing issues that we have with the current state code.
You might fill us in on, in your view, what might be the top one or two of those long-standing issues that you would like some relief from?
Yeah, for me, the big one is Code 60. Code 60 needs updated once again. I know that there were some changes 4 years ago in the 2016 session, but there are a plethora of issues with Code 60 and how we deal with liquor in West Virginia.
Oh yeah, you know, I understand that. They're probably a way long list, longer than we can get into today. But
yeah, I'm not about to tackle the minutia of Code 60, but that's agenda number one for us. And if Justice or the ABC don't attempt to amend that even temporarily, we already have. We're setting things in motion to do that through the next legislative session.
Yeah, well, I mean, I know you're saying the code chapter, that's a big, it's got everything in it.
Yeah, it needs tackled. I mean, that's just that's
yeah,
the
but that
bottom
would take an immense amount of everybody working together. And so what are you doing to get all those people together? I mean, how is that gonna happen, or how would you like to see it happen?
You know, the momentum has picked up in the last week, to be honest. I've received numerous calls from legislators, and I have a meeting with the Chamber of Commerce coming up, and I think that we can kind of plug and play all these individuals and find ways to make this happen in the next session. And from what we understand is that because that's a constitutional issue, that it might present some issues, but we can amend that hopefully as easy as what we could writing an entirely new code. But that's just that's the tip of the iceberg for me. There are other kind of operational regulatory issues that we can fix as well.
Yeah, well, so what is like something that you're specifically regulated that's a real pain in the rear right now? That you mentioned some of the record keeping thing, I guess, but what is it that's really hitting you in the pocketbook as a bar owner?
Wow, well, I think that honestly, if we're going to talk about the pocketbook, the licensing structure and the permitting structure at the ABCA is entirely too regressive. That's just full stop. It's too regressive.
Yeah, but the private club laws, do you think the fees are too high? Is that what you're saying? For
no. And any extra permit that you would like to add. So,
oh, okay.
$100 for a growler. If you want to do wine gift basket delivery, that's another $250. If you want to sell wine to go, that's another $250. If you want to have curbside delivery, you have to have $10,000 worth of groceries. It's those things that I think that is item number one that we have to tackle, and those things need to be baked into the annual license. They just do. And if we come back out of this pandemic in the next fiscal year, and we want these businesses to survive, we need to give them the means to survive. We are not getting fiscal relief from the state. We just aren't. There's $800 million sitting somewhere. Jim Justice knows where. And if they aren't going to help us monetarily, we need to find ways to I guess, nickel and dime the state to make this easier for the rest of us. So if you spend the extra $250 to do wine to go, and you have a growler license or growler permit and this, that, and the other thing, it adds up to nearly $1,000. That's a lot of money for labor. That's a lot of money for inventory. It's it's just too much money, period.
Yeah. Well, I want to bring everybody else in now. Maybe we can talk a little bit about some of the ways of this relief could come about. I mean, I think, Rob, you had an idea on some relief. Just throw that out. You told me about it earlier.
Yeah, this one's just an idea I've been kicking around for like a week or so, and this is the kind of thing that can be done through in kind of a temporary measure. That that licensees would be able to get a rebate on excise taxes for what they've sold, and maybe the liquor taxes particularly, because I know you guys are paying essentially what is it, double the state sales tax when you go and buy your liquor retail, and then you again have to tax it again when it's taxed with standard sales tax at the point of sale. So it's being taxed 3 times. You're getting 21% more or less when you get right down to it. If you could get, say, that 14% that you're paying retail back for just for what you bought in 2020, and say the first 9 months of 20, or an 18-month period, whatever, give you an opportunity to move that. Is that something you think would actually be helpful, or is that just kind of a non-starter? You don't think that really would amount to much?
I think that's good for a club licensee. I think in a more comprehensive way, I would love to see some sort of maybe sales tax rebate.
Okay. Well, the excise tax would cover the actual beer you sold too.
That's true. That's true.
Yeah. So whatever that comes out to. Matt, what is that per keg right now in the state? What's the excise tax?
The beer excise tax?
Yeah.
18
It's
cents a gallon.
$5.50 a barrel.
$5.50 a barrel?
Yeah, so half barrel keg, $2.75.
Okay.
Six still a little under $1.
Now here's the second thing that this just came up while you were mentioning. You did mention that, you said we don't need or not need to, but we probably won't start writing an entirely new code. But have you thought about the idea? Any legislator kicked out the idea of maybe throwing this up to the West Virginia Legislative Institute, which is run out of the law school up in Morgantown, which pulls together all kinds of interested parties to come up with completely new pieces of code. They've done this with probate code in the past. They've done this with landlord-tenant law in the past. And, for example, I worked on it in law school with landlord-tenant, and we brought together landlords, we brought together tenant advocates, we brought together all sorts of different, potentially interested parties, and tried to hammer out a proposed code to send to the legislature. Have you thought about the idea of approaching some of the legislature with the idea of kicking this up to, say, the law school, maybe actually propose a uniform alcohol code that will pull together 1116, Chapter 60, wherever the wine stuff is, all this stuff, and pulling all together in one code and having one place where you could look at it and just say, this is the code? Is that something you've kicked around or even aware of?
Yeah, so I had a meeting with Delegate Hornbuckle 2 days ago, and we've got kind of a 3-pronged approach here. We are going to hopefully, and of course this is just the beginning stage, we want to certainly tackle 60 that I mentioned already. Secondly, we want to begin to kind of shave away some of this red tape and kind of operational regulatory issues that we can easily just strike through. And then third is to do something comprehensive.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think one of the things you could do with the licensing fees is just have that stacking occur only on the initial license. And after that, once they've already reviewed you, you've got a license for these various types of license.
Right.
To not have that added fee in the future. And that would simplify that. We could also simplify our initial licensing, just like other states. Ohio is very easy to get your initial license.
Right.
They've expanded their alcohol industry dramatically with that. And then as far as the tax impact, I think I've got an idea about maybe a tax credit for those manufacturers, whether it's brewers, distillers, cideries that had to have a capital investment to get through this COVID-19 pandemic. A lot of people had to do new bottling lines. They had big capital investments in a time where their revenues were challenged. And I think maybe we could see if there's an appetite for a tax credit for those folks.
Yeah, that wouldn't really help the retailer side or the bars and restaurants so much, but that is yeah, maybe we'll get to Matt and see what the brewers think about some tax credits, additional tax credits for investment.
I think there were some that had investments on the retail side, but Jeff, you know better than I do. Maybe we could look at that.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it all comes back to the permitting. I mean, think of all the people that once they shut down had to go through all the hoops with the state to buy the growler permit, and the upfront costs of buying growlers and getting crowler machines, and all this stuff is just beginning to add up, and we don't have enough opportunities for points of sale. That's the bottom line for me, is that we're hamstrung with the way that we can sell our product, whether it be third-party delivery, curbside, any number of opportunities to sell product. We can't sell sealed containers of liquor. We can't sell sealed containers of wine under normal circumstances. And I want to make it abundantly clear that simply because we had these temporary provisions doesn't mean that they will be permanent.
Yeah, I mean, those were emergency rules, right? I mean, those, when the emergency's in, that those would go away.
Yeah, well, I have customers that are under the assumption that once the pandemic is over, that these will be commonplace. And I tell them every single time, do not get used to eating and having a meal in the street. Do not get used to calling an order and having us bring it to your car. And I think that's for me at this point in this campaign, is the motivation to get customers and the average citizen of West Virginia involved. This will affect them as well. And I think that they need to have that understanding.
How soon, how soon will you think we'll have a document or an outline that people can see so they know what they're supporting, that they could then take that to their legislator or governor or whatever?
So yesterday I posted on Summit's Facebook page a script for people to use to contact the governor, the ABCA commissioner, the Chamber of Commerce, Senate President, and who else? I've got it right here.
Speaker of the House.
Oh, Roger Hanshaw. Yeah.
Yeah.
Speaker of the House. And 12 hours later, I was already receiving feedback that the ABC was inundated with phone calls and emails, and that they were personally responding to every single one of them. They are referring all of those people to Senator Blair, and they're also forwarding all emails and voicemails to Senator Blair. So this is within 12 hours. So I think that we need to get and continue to have that momentum from customers. And my feedback was, or that I received, was that the state was unaware of what the service industry was going through, that they felt that things had continued to progress in a normal way and that they didn't need to do anything effectively. So we just need to maintain pressure as far as I'm concerned.
One final question for me.
Go ahead, Rob.
This is Beadsy. Have you spoke with anybody in Senator Blair's camp, him directly, or anybody in his general, because he's real important when it comes to this kind of stuff right now. And my experience with him in the past is he's been a little resistant to some alcohol stuff, but that was several years ago. So
I have not spoken to anybody directly. People I've been working with have.
Okay.
And my perception is that he's willing to or at least whoever's in his office responding is willing to hear us out.
Okay.
I I don't know how people well, how in tune people are with what happens in the legislature, but things are interesting right now, to say the least. So there's a big divide in the Republican Party, and there are a lot of things we need to tackle in that regard. So if we can get Republican leadership on board, I think we're golden.
So Jeff, we have over 1,000, licensees of liquor and wine restaurants and bars in the state. They employ thousands of people and generate millions of tax dollars. How far along are you in getting those folks organized really to be the ones that do the heavy lifting in this effort?
I can think of a select few of other small business owners who are active behind the scenes, not nearly as open as I am with it. But to be honest, it's been tough because their time and resources are maybe better spent in other ways, maintaining their restaurants, ensuring that they keep their staff employed. And I understand why they might not want to spend the same amount of time that I do. But it's been hard. I'll be frank. It's been hard to get other businesses on board.
Yeah, just if it's a critical issue that people are going to go out of business if they don't get relief, you would think they'd be inclined to want to really speak up and speak loudly, and I hope they do.
No, I agree, but I think that the importance in some small business owners contributing their own sweat equity into their business maybe takes precedence over trying to battle traditionally difficult state to work with in terms of getting things changed. I think there's certainly I don't know. It's a struggle to motivate people to work with a state that is resistant to change. Mm-hmm. It's years and years of disappointment and resentment, and honestly, it's baked into what it means to be a West Virginian, and we're just used to these things. So I'm not one to sit and do nothing. That's just the way I've been, but I don't blame anybody else for not acting the same way I am.
Well, Jeff, I think you guys have a good voice here. You have remember the adjustments you got done in between March and April? That was done quickly with a good group. You were involved, probably Matt, the Craft Brewers Guild, a bunch of people got some changes made, and that happened quickly. And in the past, we've had some really good effort with the Joint Committee on Economic Development. Mm-hmm. And here, this has such a huge impact on the state that I think they would be open to listen. And frankly, last year we got, in March we were talking at the Farm to Bottle Summit, and we had 12 active bills still live, and 8 of those passed. One of them got vetoed, but that's a pretty good record. So I think there's people in the legislature that really sort of get it, and people like you really can get this out there, and I think we just need to pressure this in the right way. Maybe if they can take up something in the Joint Committee on Economic Development to see what we can do to help the industry, I think we can make some future adjustments.
Yeah, and I think that it's imperative that state officials realize what impact this has at the state level, and I get the idea that the state doesn't necessarily understand how bad the service industry has it, because they are making copious amounts of money with liquor sales right now. So retail liquor sales does not tell the story of bars and restaurants. So there's an existential issue to be had here. If we enter the next fiscal year and we have maybe conservatively 25% of bars and restaurants that can't survive the next 3 or 4 months over winter and can't afford to purchase their licensing fees, can't afford to shore up any tax issues with the state in order to get their annual license, then the ABC has a funding problem, a very bad funding problem, and the state has a tax problem. So I don't understand, and for the life of me, I am continually mystified that the state has not done more to help this segment of the West Virginia economy.
You're exactly right. And what that does is that echoes around the state, because you guys anchor communities in ways besides your own sales, with tourism and everybody else, interacting in your communities. This is a bigger impact than just the alcohol sales. So I think that we need to get this voice out there. And I know you're frustrated, but you guys have a voice, and there's the importance to the state of this industry can't be underscored. I think people get it. We just need to get focused and try to get their attention.
Good points. And Jeff, we'll definitely put a link up with this website for your guide to what you'd like, what people can do and who they can contact. And is there anything else that you'd like to say about what we could do or what you'd love to have the craft beer community do that could help this move along, get started?
I specifically, I don't really have an answer. I really don't know, because we don't have anybody to lobby for us. That's the ultimate issue. There is no bartender or server union in West Virginia. There is no really.
There's no restaurant association.
Yeah, so I think we're swimming upstream in that regard, and that's why I think it's so important to get customers actively involved in this. They can, honestly, they would probably mean just as much as a restaurant association, but if they speak loudly and with with enough participation. But I think that I would like to see more West Virginia breweries involved, because there are things that West Virginia breweries and certainly regional national breweries could do for accounts that we can't legally accept. So even I mentioned it a few days ago, even the issues with POS and glassware. I can accept unlimited amounts of Jack Daniel's pint glasses in my bar and not get in trouble for it. No fines, nothing. It's perfectly okay. But if Matt were to give me one Big Timber logo pint,
no beer.
I can't accept it. And it's just one of those other small things that adds up and kind of snowballs into a bigger issue. And like I said, I don't want to get bogged down. There are a dozen other small issues, but.
Well, I think that's a good segue over to the brewers side of this, and I want to get Matt Kwasniewski into this conversation. Matt, you've heard, certainly you're kind of involved in both as a retailer, you have your brew pub, and you're also certainly the brewer, and you do distribution and everything else. Give us a little review of where you guys stand and what you're looking at with policy these days, and what you think is important, especially anything you need changed.
Well, I would like to kind of piggyback on what Jeff was saying. For one, Jeff, please reach out to us whenever you do something like that, because like with the politics, and I'm a little disconnected, but I can at least push it on our social media or whatnot. But politics in West Virginia, there's still a lot of geographically, and I haven't heard anything from like Elkin's side of retailers or on-premise accounts that we're trying to help push the state. But if you let us know, we can definitely get the word out there. That way it's not just the reps down in Cabell and Putnam pushing. We'll get some up in Randolph or Tucker. So, but And then with the state, I mean, my biggest issue with them is they're trying to play into the confines of the laws that have been set before them. And basically, I don't know how much has changed in the last 80 years, and at least on the beer side of things, exclude the last 10 years maybe, or the last 5 even. But it's like 80, 90 years ago, the thought of what beer laws or regulations needed to be done, it's kind of mind-blowing that we're still we're confined to that thought process. I mean, if they just wiped everything out and then said, this is what needs to happen, they could probably write 2 pages of policy and say, call it a day. Because it's way more complicated, because they're like, well, it's been done this way. There's a track record. And it's like, you don't need that. What are you trying to accomplish? We're trying to, protect the 3-tier system. That's fine. There's benefits to that. But to sit there and be like, well, private club, we can't ship beer, everything, any change is, instead of looking at it as how can we make this easier, it's like, wait, why would we do something different? And I think it should just be, what are we trying to achieve? And let's make it the simple, easiest, most clear-cut way to achieve that goal. And the ABCA seems to be, instead of, and I think they're happy to work with us, but it's just that whole mindset that, okay, we'll make this change, but we got to have documentation of all this change, instead of, well, why do we have all this documentation that no one ever looks at? Why not get rid of that and make this change? Because this is the only problem we see with this. Let's make this happen. Like, this is the end goal. Let's find the simplest way to that end goal. Like the whole retailers thing, it's something that needed to be done, I think, but something that really puzzled me was what in July they decided, line cleaning was all of a sudden an imperative for retailers. And it's like, way to kick them while they're down. I mean, for one, most people are short-staffed, whatnot. Sure, lines needed to be clean, but most of these people aren't pouring draft right now. So I'm just like, how did this get rolled in and nobody knew about it? At least it was a surprise to us up here. So, and that's just my thoughts on the retail side, sort of.
Yeah. So are there anything though, Matt, on the actual production side that are real sticklers that kind of don't make sense? I mean, you said a lot of them are just legacy things. They're like left over because of beer law from 80 years ago. Is there a couple of things that the Brewers Association or the Brewers Guild, are looking at again and would love to see a little relaxation on?
Yeah, I mean, well, with all this, meetings and gatherings of brewers across the state have been pretty scarce, but I would like it. The thing is, with the ABCA, they are willing to work with us. They've never really gave us any other idea that they were against us. But it's a lot working with the wholesalers, and the wholesalers are our partners. Like, at least at Big Timber, like, we do a lot of wholesale business. It's still the majority of our business. And, but the problem is the lines of communication, it's hard to dedicate a lot of time and effort to educate people to make this change, to make any kind of change. And that's because we're all small businesses. We're all busy. and to be like, I finally have time. Let's meet now. And then, you know, you got to get the planets aligned to get a bunch of people in the same room at the same time to actually make moves with this stuff. As far as policies, like we see her outside of the state, there's a lot of direct mail order beer, you know, which that would be great to do. I see where there's going to be a lot of pushback to do that, but you know, whenever we got started, the whole idea was we started self-distribution, but we knew that wasn't like, for us, for our plan, it was going to make financial sense just because West Virginia is a hard state to get around, and it's sparsely populated. So we were always planning on signing with distributors. But that was 6 years ago, and the craft beer business is crazy, and it's nothing like it was 6 years ago. And that was, you know, make a system as big as you could afford, sell as much beer as possible. You're not going to be able to keep up. Well, now it's gotten smaller, more specialty, and it's like we were fortunate to hit the market when we did because we have a lot of shelf space and we want to keep that shelf space. That is what keeps the lights on. But now with like small specialty beers, we find a bigger problem of basically communicating to get one case down to Jeff in Huntington from Elkins or whatnot. And it's, and most of the time it works out fine, but it is, you know, distributors are designed to move a lot of beer. Like it's hard to make a distributor and your idea is you're going to sell one can of beer or 12, 16 ounces of beer to one person every 3 months. Like that doesn't really make sense to build a business around. That's, you know, there's huge logistic companies that can actually do that. And it's like, well, a good example is the head brewer at Jackie O's, Brad Clark. He left Jackie O's and then he moved to California, and he's got a brewery completely dedicated to putting out specialty. Most of them are going to be barrel aged or stouts or whatnot. And, you know, he might move 200 barrels a year or something. I heard him talk about it. And, but the idea was it was going to be a mail order service. You subscribe, and if you're a fan of his beers and you dedicate it, you pay like a monthly fee and you get a shipment every so often. And I think he said like he was going to try to make it consistent, but you know, there might be a gap because the beer wasn't up to snuff, but he was going to make sure that you got your money's worth. And it's like, that's actually a really great business plan, I think, but that would never fly in West Virginia. And
Because you can't ship beer as a brewery in West Virginia, right?
Correct. And it makes a problem with like sending off samples for labs and whatnot, but it's, and you know, like,
you know, the cideries that we have now can do the direct shipment, and they ship their ciders all over the country and to West Virginians, and they can do the cider of the month club. Or, you know, I'm not sure that a West Virginia brewery in and of itself would want to do that, but at a distributor level, you know, you could have a, you know, West Virginia beer club that you get beers from all over the state.
And Chuck, to add to that, I tried to tackle this issue with the ABC 9 months ago when we were trying to get home delivery. And I explained to them that was Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Virginia all allowed direct shipment.
Yes, they do. They all do.
And I mentioned that that the framework for that exists already in West Virginia code, that wineries and cideries can do this. And the ABC's hang up is that they think that it's going to be a constitutional issue with other states, and they don't want to step on the toes of the wholesalers.
That's the last one is the reason, I think.
And
Well,
the fact that the ABC doesn't understand the
But
Constitution.
maybe what you need to think about is if the wholesalers are involved and maybe they're the direct shippers, but it still sells a lot of West Virginia beer.
Well,
But they
and I think that the easy solution to that is to tie in direct shipment to on-premise sales. So the person places an order and it's directly sent or faxed or whatever to the brewery, or they call over the phone and they purchase it directly from the brewery, that could be considered an on-premise sale that could be shipped out. So by then you don't have to worry about the three-tier system and going through wholesalers. And I know I'm probably pissing off my distributor friends, but it is what it is, guys.
Hey, but Jeff, wouldn't that apply then to like Matt Kwasniewski's tap room as a retailer too? You know, he would just like, or Summit Beer Station, you all could do direct sales, which makes perfect sense as a retail sale, and have a shipment if you're allowed to ship. Yeah.
And another excuse, and Justice gave this last Thursday, is that they have no way to enforce ID checks. But to me, I think that's a very silly argument to make when they have already temporarily legalized home delivery. They figured it out temporarily. Why can't we do this permanently? So other states have figured it out. Take the framework that exists in Ohio. Take the framework that exists in Virginia. Create the permit. Have get whatever fees you want out of it. I don't know, but the framework exists.
Yeah, and to reiterate on that, like UPS and FedEx, I mean, they have a selection that says, hey, you must be 21 to sign and receive this, and that shouldn't be a problem.
No, it's not. And that's just somebody that just doesn't understand how modern shipping technology works. If you have to sign off for something and a competent adult over the age of 21 has to sign for it, like you have to do with any whiskey club, any tequila club, and most beer clubs that I've ever had anything to do with, that's just somebody just doesn't know what they're talking about, throwing something out there, which, not getting political, sounds like certain members of our current government.
Yeah, but you know, we already and have for a number of years had, they've licensed wine shipments into West Virginia. Well, how do they, you know,
Exactly.
That's a part of West Virginia's state law, and they're allowing it to happen every day. And they're telling our breweries, well, you can't do it, but we allow all these out-of-state wineries to do it? Come on.
So there's a Supreme Court case directly on point about out-of-state wineries being able to sell anywhere in the United States.
Yep. Well,
I mean, that's why.
And that's why most states allow breweries to do it, you know, like most of our surrounding states anyway.
And the reason why our state doesn't allow breweries to do it is because the specific case only talks about wineries, and while it mentions alcohol, it only talks about Michigan wine. So because it doesn't say whiskey and it doesn't say beer, certain members of the bar who happen to be working for the state of West Virginia, who don't understand the Constitution of the United States, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
All right, well, let's get back to Matt here. I want Matt to weigh in on this, and then if anyone else has a question here for Matt, as far as from the brewer's perspective of what they're thinking on policy currently.
Well, just to push a little bit more on that direct shipment, it's like, it doesn't make sense for us to like direct ship IPA at this point. Like, we move enough Big Timber IPA that we need a wholesaler to do it. And also, it doesn't make sense for every brewery to start direct shipping beer, because I hate shipping stuff. Like, it's a lot of packaging, especially beer. Like, you don't want to, but if the thing is, it's going to be a premium product and you're going to have to charge extra for it. And it's not like every West Virginian is going to quit buying beer at the grocery store to get direct ship beer. And it's a specialty product. Beer didn't used to be a specialty product. It was like a commodity. It was just, you had 3 choices, you picked one of them, and that was it. But as the industry has matured, it's like West Virginia needs to change, but that's the whole thing. Like, don't like change. And instead of allowing it to happen and then seeing what shouldn't happen, or when people take advantage of it and making a change, then they're so afraid of the floodgates opening and all of a sudden craziness happens. And that's not, I don't feel like it's going to be the case, but there's positives and negatives to it. But it's like, yeah, it's, if we're going to ship, especially like a pastry stout, I feel like sometimes it's kind of a hang up for our distributors to try to get that case delivered to the one account that wants it.
But
Hey, I
man,
like that, by the way. No, that's good for me.
if I could get the best of West Virginia beer in a beer of the month club or quarterly, I could get your stout, and I could get Chestnut Brew Works, and I could get Higher Ground or wherever, just the best of West Virginia beer delivered. And that could start spreading our beer across the adjacent states and get a good market going.
Ooh,
Because
sounds like a business project for Summit Beer Station.
But yeah, I mean, other things as far as like, well, we'd like to change, they bumped up the ABV. Honestly, I think it should be a process thing. Beer made by normal, or alcohol made by fermentation without any other outside factors should be called beer, or made with grain. You should be able to get have multiple licenses in the same building. So if somebody wanted to make a cider that also makes beer, I mean, the equipment makes sense. You have the same equipment. Why handicap a business? Like, if they need to be able to pivot to make another fermented beverage, it's not that different from fermented grain. It's not different from fermented fruit for the most part.
So you're saying like you could co-locate the license at the same place in the same facility?
Yeah, like we should be able to, as a brewery, get a winery license. Like, it doesn't make sense to me that's not possible.
Right, as long as the federal law allows it, which they do. The state law should allow it as well.
Yeah, and I think, well, when you look at federally, like the breweries have, the craft beer boom, a large part of it was deregulation, where I think at West Virginia, it's not, they're allowing us to do more, per se, but it's not deregulation. There's more regulation involved, and it should just be less regulation, give us more freedom, and then whenever they see somebody take advantage of it, or do something that they didn't expect, then they could regulate that. But instead, it's more like, okay, we'll allow you to do this, but you got to fill out 5 other forms. And and I feel for the people at the ABCA, because most of them have been there for a long time, and from what I gather, I'm sending in more paperwork every year to them. And to me, I'd be like, there's not that much different that I do. Like, we still do pretty much the same thing we did 5 years ago. And to me, I'd be like, I don't think they're looking at some of it. Maybe they are, but I don't get a lot of feedback from it. And I feel like it's just, they're just expanding the paperwork monster. And to me, it's not good. But
I don't understand why they don't try to make their lives easier. That's just such a baffling aspect to all of this.
Yeah, and I file most of the paperwork to them, and I'm just like, I find myself spending more time sending paperwork to the ABCA, and honestly, it's not because I'm doing anything different, it's because they're requesting more, but I'm getting less feedback from it. But it's just it's that thought that like whoever has the most paperwork wins or something. And it's like, well, I'm going to do my due diligence, but
Right, that
doesn't make
West
sense.
Virginia has a reputation nationally for these things. Let's get that straight. Breweries across the country understand how difficult it is here. I will never
Probably
forget.
the last brewery the Bells came, last state the Bells came
Exactly.
to.
Exactly.
Larry Bell.
Larry Bell said that he was
Larry,
not going to enter West Virginia if he had to hire a lawyer to do it. So,
you know, this is scary, but I'm going to agree with both Matt and Jeff. I think we could simplify our licensure process and not have any less oversight. I think we could simplify our label approval process. I think we could make it, you know, streamline the process and make it so you could upload it and have a tracking system and make this work very well for the ABCA. And we just need to put some effort into the system. And I think they're good people doing a great job. It's just the paperwork, as you guys said, sort of overwhelms people at times.
Yeah, you know,
Yeah.
the ABCA didn't write those laws. I mean, we got a mess of laws, as Jeff alluded to earlier, that are, and Matt too, you know, they go back 80 years, they go back to Prohibition, after Prohibition, and they're crazy, and they're like stacked on, they don't fit together, and the ABCA's got to try to administer that. It's a nightmare.
Charles, they
Yeah.
wrote their own administrative rules, and they write their own administrative rules, and that's where the rubber really hits the road with this crap. There's nothing in the code about labeling. Nothing in the code about labeling. It's all administrative rules.
Well, that's
And
a good.
they could clean that stuff up. They've made themselves more work because that makes them more important in the past. That's why they've done it. And now they're finding themselves, now instead of having 3 or 4 state breweries, they've got 25. We don't know how to handle this because they've only added like 2 staff members in the last couple of years.
Well, Rob, what if they had a system where you could upload your label? You've already been through the label process several times and you check these different boxes and fill out important information as to ingredients that are new, that aren't approved or anything like that. And they could review that on a database. They could pull it up and review it and either approve it, or if it's not approved in 10 days, it's approved, or they could put a halt on that one until they get back to you.
Oh,
That
you
would
mean
work.
like other?
One that I've advocated has always been just the affidavit system, whereas that the producer actually just says, we affirm under penalty of perjury that this label, to the best of our knowledge, comports to all legal requirements in the state of West Virginia and the United States of America. Here it is. And if something comes back in 5 or 10 days, then it automatically goes through.
See,
And
to me,
if you're just flat out lying, if you're committing perjury, I mean, because that causes people to think about twice before they sign it. If you're
Rob, I think
saying
that's
something is wrong, you've committed perjury. People aren't going to do that. People aren't going to say, yeah, this beer is 5% when it's 15%, because it's perjury.
Yeah.
It's an affidavit system. That's what Virginia does.
I don't even think, like, why do we need a label approval? Who looks at it?
Amen.
Nobody.
Amen.
But like, so why not, instead of whenever we submit our license, it's here are the rules of beer. You got them. If you don't commit to those rules, then you could forfeit your license. And that way, instead of them filing, hundreds of hundreds of labels, they can just say, like, they can have somebody out there that's buying a can off the shelf, checking the ABV, making sure it's within 0.3%, and calling it a day.
Yeah.
And that way, if somebody's straight up lying, or somebody's coming up.
Matt, some people have said basically make it presumptive. If the TTB approves your label, if you're selling out of state, it's okay in West Virginia. They have
Exactly.
a process that works very well.
Yeah.
They only require sort of ultra approval on things that are new and different that aren't on their ingredient list, and it works very well.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm saying, like, don't worry about approval, worry about enforcement. And that way, if you find somebody that's lying about ABV or whatnot, you can keep adding, like, then all of a sudden they're on probation. And if they get caught again lying about, you know, ABV or using ingredients that aren't approved by the FDA, like, fine, do it like that instead of sitting there and making sure that there's 20 pieces of paper attached to a beer that's going to be gone in 3 weeks. So,
Gentlemen, I have to step out for about 2 minutes. I'll be right back. Okay.
Yeah, let me, want to kind of get this thing wrapped up here before long. I need to get with Chuck Johnson. Chuck, because I know you had some information on the cider law, and I know we had some changes that were made last year in the legislation, and maybe they're coming back. You said one was vetoed. If you could just give a quick briefing on the cider law in West Virginia now.
Yeah, so we had 4159, House Bill 4159 was passed, and it really was an attempt, as we suggested earlier, to almost start a rewrite of the law. And they were going to create a special class of manufacturing for cideries instead of lumping them in with the wineries. And one of the reasons that that's important is that, you know, cideries really compete with their product with the breweries. A cider is closer to, the people that consume cider are closer to the beer drinkers than the wine drinkers. And the cideries pay, because they're a farm winery, the same excise tax that you do on wine. So it was really anti-competitive, and it didn't work very well. So
Yeah,
they said, look, let's do
excise, Chuck, that wine tax is like $1 a gallon. And
it's ridiculously high
Yeah.
compared to what you pay on beer. So
beer is 18
it's hard for
cents a
them to
gallon.
compete,
Yeah.
Charles.
Yeah, 18
Go ahead,
cents
sorry.
a gallon versus $1 a gallon. I can see why the cideries think they're getting screwed.
Well, and the consumer is, if you have to go pay, instead of $4 or $5 for a craft cider, you have to pay 10, then they're going to get a beer. Now, Matt, you may like that, but the cideries, it's hard for them to compete, you know? And so
Yeah.
that's the competitive factor. But so here was what they did. They said, look, we're going to have a separate class of manufacturers for cideries. We're going to have an agricultural development fund that has money set aside so we can grow agricultural apples in West Virginia and sell them here and throughout the East Coast. And it was a great idea because we can grow apples here. It's just we're not growing the right brand, right types of apples here. And they had a separate tax structure to support this that was comparable. So it was very innovative, and getting this law passed was really a positive approach. It was vetoed, and so maybe what I would say is let's go back and see if there's pieces we can pick out of this in the same vein of sort of rewriting these laws that to make them more workable. I think the cideries would look to maybe be able to sell off-premises sales, maybe larger samples in their tasting room, those kind of things, and make
Growlers.
it more competitive across the types of alcohol.
yeah, and Charles, like, I'm not against any of that because, like I said, they need to deregulate the God, heck, my dog is mine, but they need to deregulate, like, or the ABCA needs to, like, start with a clean slate and say, what are we trying to achieve here? And, you know, like, there's plenty of other countries that charge tax on ABV. So if you're making a 10% wine and I'm making a 15% beer, I'm not getting a tax break on it just because one's made with fruit and one's made with grain. It doesn't make sense. It makes sense when most of the stuff you make with grain is 5%, most of the stuff you make with fruit is 10%, and so on. And when you distill it, you're 30% plus. And it's just, why not just simplify the more alcohol that's in a product, you should charge more excise tax for it. And there's one other thing that I didn't touch on, but the whole collaboration thing. If businesses want to work together in West Virginia, you should say, go for it. Like, there should be not all this, like, where's it produced? Who cares? And, you know, if the two businesses are willing to work together, which I think that's like something that doesn't happen too often in the state, they should just allow it to happen. Like, have them set up their agreement, and that's how it should be governed, instead of saying like, well, if they got a distribution agreement here and whatnot. I mean, everything seems like it's 10 times more complicated than it needs to be. And if they just said, okay, you're allowed to do that, you take advantage of it, you'll lose that, you know, you won't be able to do it anymore.
But I like the idea that, you know, that innovation that the cideries tried to get into the new law, but it was vetoed. Do you know why? What was the main reason for that veto? Can you speak on that?
I do know why, but I can't speak on it. But that being said, it was the first start of innovation, and I think we should go back and try to continue that effort. And as to Matt's comment, you know, and House Bill 3098, I think if you look at that, and I need to get it out to another brewer that asked this question, it looks like brewers can now do some distilling if they get the right license. So it's a start. It's a start in the right direction. And so we just need to continue, and sometimes it's one step forward, to, you know, half step back, you know, those kind of things, and we just got to keep moving. But I think that for cideries, they can really have an agricultural impact on the state. And eventually brewers can do the same if they can start sourcing their products locally. And so that's a big plus for the state as well.
Yeah, we've certainly seen a growth in breweries buying local products to put into their beer.
Yeah, I mean, we buy local product, but why would, if we made a beer with apple sugar, we can make it up to 49% apple sugar, which is halfway to full on cider.
Yes.
But man, we hit 51% where we need a wine license, and that's not possible, and you know, probably lose our brewer's license over it. And it's just those, and like you said, cider and beer, it's a very similar crowd. It's directed at a similar customer. It's a lower ABV product. It's a beverage, not necessarily a sipper. And it baffles me that to me, all of that law and code, it's archaic, because, you know, at the time they found out they could, you know, grains weren't as modified, so beer usually didn't hit the ABV that, you know, a cider would, because that's a simple sugar, and yeast can break that down, shoot the ABV up. So fruit, any kind of fermented fruit, higher alcohol, let's tax it higher. Fermented grain, well, it's not going to get that high. And then if you distill it, well, you can get it up there, and you tax it differently. And
let me throw you a curveball. What is this seltzer stuff? It can be like malt based, or it could be apple based, or, you know, it could be fruit based. I mean, there's no definition there, and I don't know if we need to do something there, or how we should address that.
It's registered as a malt beverage, so.
Oh, you're talking about the stuff that Parkersburg Brewing does?
Yeah.
It registers malt beverage.
Yeah, the malt beverages fall under beer.
But for instance, like Parkersburg and like many of the other big national brewers that are making seltzers, they're just using sugar. They're not using malt in any way.
Well, I think it's the overall issue of a lack of equity of enforcement in the state. That's just that's the problem. There's no equity in any of this. So down to the way that individual codes are enforced. So I think that's the general theme.
And we did a seltzer as well, and when talking to the state, they just say, well, whatever the feds go by. And the federal government, it's like, if it's grain and, you know, table sugar, sugar cane derived, that counts as a grain and not as a fruit. We used corn sugar in ours, so, but it's not malt, but it's because it's corn, it counts as a grain. Um,
Well, we're talking about a state that considers a salt packet as a prepared food and a candy bar as not. So, so that's what we're dealing with.
Hey, guys,
Yeah.
we got to wrap this up, and I really appreciate what I'm hearing. I think some of the big takeaways I'm getting is that we need more creativity in our laws. We need to have more flexibility. But I want to go to each of you and ask for, you know, like a final thought and comment on the whole topic of alcohol policy, beverage alcohol policy. Jeff, I'll start with you.
That's some serious pressure right there. No, I think that honestly, my approach right now and my, I guess, motive for all this is no different than what it was, I don't know, 7 or 8 years ago when I helped start Rails and Ales, and that we need to continue to progress in the beverage and service industry in West Virginia. So we need to have the mechanisms at the state kind of maybe shift, change, mold, whatever we need to do to continue to foster an environment in which bars and restaurants and breweries, distilleries, cideries, wineries can continue to survive. And it's kind of bubbled up over the pandemic that the issues that we've always been dealing with are that much worse currently. So I think it's vital that we make an effort to start chipping away at this, if not throw it out entirely and start anew.
All right. Rob Abston, your summation, please.
I'm going to say what I've always said for like the last 10 years, is that we need to amend the Constitution of the state of West Virginia, throw out 1116, throw out Chapter 60, throw out all this stuff and put everything under one uniform alcohol code that recognizes that the two issues that we have in West Virginia are making sure that it is productive for an economic standpoint, but keeping it out of the hands of people who should not have it, whether that be minors, whether that be professional alcoholics or whatever. Having a code that basically regulates consumption on one hand, just for, you know, restricting it for people that shouldn't have it, and on the other hand, encouraging production, manufacture, sale, retail, etc. Ditching all these different little fiefdoms. There should be no difference between wine, cider, beer, liquor, mead, whatever. I think we need to start from scratch, and it's crap at all.
All right, thank you. Very good. And Matt Kwasniewski, you're up next.
All right. Yeah, to follow up, I agree with Rob, and I don't agree with you, Charles, when you said be more creative. I think they need to simplify the laws, because I think they've gotten way too creative with the laws and their interpretations of such, and it's just make it black and white. If somebody enters a gray area, figure it out whenever it happens, instead of you know, kneecapping everybody else for they're just trying to do a business and promote you know, I don't want to say like consumption, but just promote people enjoying West Virginia beverages, and especially on the retail side, being able to help support those accounts that, I mean, nobody expected this kind of year. It's already a hard business to be in. And, you know, we had our trials and tribulations, but most of our retailers went through a lot more than what we did. So fortunately, we had a canning line. So.
Okay, Chuck Johnson, you get the final word.
Well, I'm all in favor of trying to do some simplification to the regulations and the statutes, but I think immediately we can do some simplified procedures that don't do away with any regulatory oversight. And we can make it easier both on, you know, the manufacturer and the retailer and on the ABCA. And frankly, they need our support. They are probably overwhelmed. During the pandemic, they had to get some added revenue to get some more inspectors out there. They are very much overwhelmed. And so I think if we put investment into the system, it can make the whole industry grow and make it easier. So I think that's valid. I'd like to see labeling simplification. I'd like to see some simplification of the laws. And if I look at Ohio, Virginia, Kentucky, they can make it work, and they can make this stuff easy to grow the industry. And we still have a lot of growth to do in West Virginia.
Okay, I thank all of you. Jeff Mckay, Summit Beer Station, Huntington, West Virginia. Matt Kwasniewski, Big Timber Brewing in Elkins. Chuck Johnson with Frost Brown Todd Law Firm in Charleston. And Rob Abston, my co-host here on West Virginia Beer Roads. Again, thank you for joining us for this discussion of alcohol policy and law.
This brings us to the close of another podcast. Remember, you can subscribe on Apple, Spotify, or your favorite podcast host. Thank you for listening to West Virginia Beer Roads.
West Virginia Beer Roads is a production of BrilliantStream.com.